But I think we both know what men are like.
Your attention, ladies and gentlemen. Be sure to hold all tickets. The stewards are conducting an inquiry into the running of the 7th rate and will view the motion picture.
In the mid-1950s, Stanley Kubrick was starting to gain serious attention as a filmmaker. For his third feature, he finally had the backing of a studio in United Artists, and he chose to make a heist film in The Killing.
All right, get your hands up, all of you. Now, one move out of any one of you, and I'm going to start firing. You, fill that bag up just as fast as you know how.
The Killing was the film that put him into the next league of filmmakers. It was a real great crime story. It was written by the pulp writer Jim Thompson, who did a marvelous job with the screenplay. It was the first time that Kubrick actually had to not be the cinematographer. He couldn't do everything. He loved doing everything. He's a bit of a control freak, but he had to pass on the duties of cinematographer to somebody else and concentrate actually on directing. It had a fantastic cast, and although it wasn't particularly well received, it wasn't particularly successful at the time, it has gathered a fantastic reputation ever since.
All right, that's enough. Now put the bag here in the middle of the floor. Get back over there. Now, I'm going to open this door. I want you to go through it and go into the locker room and close the door after you. I'm going to start firing through that door 15 seconds after you close the door. Let's go. All right, close it.
It's a remarkable early piece of work. You know, it doesn't necessarily signal, you know, the big epics to come, but it's a really tight and measured film noir. Sadly, UA didn't agree, you know, that it was really worth much of a release, and the film didn't make much money and would only sort of gain its reputation once his own had done. But one person who was very impressed by it was Kirk Douglas.
Kirk Douglas would star in Stanley Kubrick's next film, Paths of Glory, which saw Kubrick return to the anti-war themes of his debut feature, Fear and Desire.
Well, Colonel, what do you think of it?
What do I think of what, sir?
The anthill. Colonel, your regiment is going to take the anthill tomorrow.
You know the condition of my men, sir.
Oh, naturally, men are going to have to be killed. Possibly a lot of them. They absorb bullets and shrapnel. And by doing so, make it possible for others to get through.
What support will we have?
I have none to give you.
What sort of casualties do you anticipate, sir?
Say 5% killed by our own barrage. It's a very generous allowance. 10% more in getting through no man's land, and 20% more getting through the wire. That leaves 65%, with the worst part of the job over. Let's say another 25% in actually taking the anthill. We're still left with a force more than adequate to hold it.
General, you're saying that more than half of my men will be killed.
Yes, it's a terrible price to pay, Colonel. But we will have the anthill.
But will we, sir?
I'm depending on you, Colonel. All France is depending on you.
Paths of Glory is about French First World War soldiers who are forced into a suicidal attack. And Kirk Douglas is Colonel Dax, who initially leads his men, eventually ends up defending them against court-martial when they refuse to fight. It's an anti-war movie, which fits in with Kubrick's oeuvre. But he didn't really adapt hugely well to the studio system. He didn't like being told what to do and how to end the film, those sorts of things. He was already starting to kick against the way things were run.
It was not shown widely in America. It was hardly shown at all in Europe because the French hated it, because they felt it was anti the French war effort. And in England, it wasn't shown very much either. But it's now become a classic. And there's no doubt about it, it's one of the best war films ever made.
Following Paths of Glory, Kubrick began work on a Western called One-Eyed Jacks with Marlon Brando, who was a fan of the up-and-coming director, but disagreements between the pair meant Kubrick left the project and Brando eventually directed the film himself. However, an even bigger opportunity presented itself to Kubrick soon after, when Kirk Douglas offered him the chance to direct Roman epic Spartacus.
Take a last look, Spartacus. She's going to Rome. She's been sold.
She's been sold?
No talking in the kitchen, slave.
Spartacus was, at the time, the most expensive movie Hollywood had ever made. It was a monster. Kirk Douglas was producing it, starring in it. He'd had Anthony Mann. He fired him because it just couldn't make this thing work, and decided to go to Stanley Kubrick, which was amazing. Stanley Kubrick was just 30, 31 years old. He had this huge picture, complete with the Spanish army as extras in it, Laurence Olivier, Tony, the whole thing. But he was up for it because he could do it.
It wasn't without a lot of difficulties. You don't embark, or you don't certainly come in on a film like that, and on that scale, whose producer is actually the star of the film, and not run into a few problems. There were a few problems down the way. This is where all the chess came into play. He had to think his way around the problems which almost daily presented themselves in putting this film together. The result is, of course, a fantastic epic, one that stands the test of time.
Slaves you were, and slaves you remain. But the terrible penalty of crucifixion has been set aside on the single condition that you identify the body or the living person of the slave called Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus! I'm Spartacus!